Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Air by SafeTraces. I'm Erik Malmstrom, the CEO of SafeTraces and your host. And joining me today from Miami, Florida is Sterling Laylock, Sustainable Development Director at Integrating Green Technologies. Sterling, welcome to Healthy Air.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for being here. So I want to share Sterling's background briefly to provide context for our conversation. Sterling Laylock is Sustainable Development Director at Integrating Green Technologies. He believes in dramatically improving the built environment and its infrastructure by setting solutions in motion that can achieve unshakable results. His main areas of focus are born from seeing firsthand just how much really needs to be done to reverse the mistakes that have been made specific to underperforming indoor air quality and the way we generate and use energy needed to make our lives work. His work centers on three critical areas of the global goals for sustainable development: climate adaptation, urban sustainability, and equity for all. Sterling continues to form alliances designed to reverse the deeply rooted systemic factors that continue to perpetuate disparities among children and families of marginalized communities, especially among communities of color. Sterling is a graduate of Florida A&M University School of Business and Industry and has been a sustainable development-minded behavioral economist starting at age 9. Wow. All right, Sterling. So let's get into it. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited about the discussion. Um, to kick us off here, tell us about your career path in the built environment, which sounds like it goes back quite a ways to your youth. How did you get your start in this professional realm, and how did you arrive at your current role?
Well, when I was a super pre-professional at 9 years old, I remember riding my bike in the summer after we moved from the city in New York to Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a very interesting place. And of course, it's hot. You're 9 years old. You have to come inside to get something to drink, 10 times an hour. And the refrigerator goes open and close. And we had that little 13-inch black and white television on the counter in the kitchen. And all of the news was about Watergate. So you come in, you're thirsty, you're 9, it's summertime, it's hot. And I looked at the television and I said, oh no, they're stealing the water. And that's what I thought it was about. So around that time, my parents never had any difficulty getting me to deal with the chore of taking out the trash because I was determined to not have to worry about not having water. And I was cleaning out every single vessel I could get my hands on and going in the backyard and filling it up with water. Put it in the tool shed. It didn't matter if it was plastic. I didn't care if it was glass. And then I realized no one's talking about this. My friends weren't, family wasn't. But these hearings kept, showing. And I thought I better go to the library because the library and Sterling were best friends, and Sterling always loved school. And I explained the situation to the librarian, and she said, well, Sterling, it could be that, but we have to do an investigation and we have to get to the facts. So we need evidence. And she took me in the back and she showed me this really cool automatic microfiche machine. And at 9 years old, she taught me how to work it. They were just sort of demonstrating it so they could use it. And it was a big deal. I'm in the back of the library. And she taught me how to use the Reader's Guide periodical. And then I realized Watergate wasn't about anyone stealing the water. And about 3 weeks after that, my father said, who is ordering the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times to the house? And how much does it cost? And from that point forward, I explained the situation. I told him what I did. And anything to do with education, anything to do with books, anything to do with learning, he would double down and invest in me. And I've always been that way ever since. So that's how I figured out the way the world should work.
Great. And just to build on that, so like buildings, talk to us a little bit about how that piqued your interest, and then specifically what challenges and issues in the built environment attract you most, and why?
Well, my career, I started out in the financial industry and I've done investment banking, estate planning, a lot of different aspects. And then I got involved in financing of infrastructure projects, and then started to understand, how things worked to cause development to happen. Around 2000, I pivoted into the built environment because of my Uncle Bill, by selection, who was a trade commissioner for the Canadian consulate in Atlanta. And he said, the way you think, you should get involved in sustainability because they're on the right track, but there are so many things missing that there needs to be some diverse thinking here, and you'll be able to figure things out. And that's how I got involved in it, because I started looking at what's missing first, as opposed to being critical of what people are already doing.
So sustainability was really the hook for you. And I guess just kind of taking it forward, your current firm and your work at integrating green technologies, what is the mission of the firm? What areas do you focus on? And then what's the scope and scale of your current work, just to give the audience some perspective on that?
Well, when we started around 2009, the whole idea was to be able to do something that was different, and something that would make a difference, and something that would push forward this whole notion around getting advanced technologies into the built environment, because we could see that there was a ton of resistance to do anything new. People wanted to do more, better, faster of the same kinds of things. So we got ourselves involved in energy efficiency from the standpoint of LED lighting before people really even understood what that was. And that kind of experience uncovered more opportunities and more opportunities. And we could see that people have a different interpretation of what sustainability is really all about, depending on who you ask and depending on what their background and experiences are. So, in a nutshell, sustainability is really about having enough for everyone forever without being wasteful and unuseful through extraction and dumping and landfill and all these things. And it's a more of a 360-degree view, where most people see it as energy efficiency or recycling or any other buzzword that may be rewarding them, because it's difficult to look at the entire picture. If something's too big or too complicated, people have a tendency to check out, and then they want to simplify it down to what they understand. And this is why we have such a fragmented effort at this time.
Got it. And then just in terms of operationalizing that, so your firm does quite a bit of consulting and advisory work and project work. Just say a little bit more about that. Like, what types of clients are you working with? What types of challenges? Just to give us more perspective.
Well, the kinds of clients that we have worked with in the past has always been a mix of, private industry players, whether they be Fortune 500 or regional firms, and then government. And one of the things that people don't quite understand is that innovation isn't really born inside business, because businesses are there to make a profit. They are not there to necessarily innovate. And when they do innovate, it's incremental. The true keepers of innovation are governments, because governments make rules, governments make regulations, and governments said we have to have airbags in every single car, and we have to have anti-lock brakes in every single car. But if industry were left up to it, it would have to drive a certain profit. It would have to drive it in a certain short period of time. And it would certainly not be a deep investment to where there's a lot of risk that things might not turn out the way that they should. But we don't really think like that. We aren't educated in the realm of where innovation actually comes from, but we deal with it every day. We just don't quite, connect the dots in how it really works.
Got it. And so you're basically working with your clients to help drive innovation towards the end of sustainability, health and safety, and generally a better built environment.
Yes, that's
Great.
exactly right.
Okay. Well, so you just referenced that you do work at the kind of corporate end of the market and major Fortune 500 type companies. But in addition to that, one of your passions and focus areas is improving the built environment, indoor air quality for underserved and neglected segments of society, including K through 12 schools, low income housing, mass transit, to name a few. It would be great if you could talk a little bit about how and why poor buildings and poor indoor air quality disproportionately impact underserved communities. What needs to be done to confront this inequality, and then also describe your work to this effect. Working with clients, any stories that you can share about working with some of these other parts of the market that are frankly neglected by a lot of other service providers who are disproportionately bearing the bad outcomes in a variety of different ways that we have from bad buildings.
Yes, I personally, I made mention early on of moving from the city in New York and then moving to New Jersey. So in my life experience, I've lived at both polar opposites end of the spectrum. And I show people photographs of the street I lived on when I was a little kid, and I showed them then what our house looked like in New Jersey and where I graduated from high school. And people don't believe me. They sort of think that George Washington was born in the White House, and it just doesn't work that way when you are trying to uplift yourself and become part of the larger mainstream America or middle class and upper middle class. So I know that education is at the heart of what causes people to have an opportunity to eradicate these disparities. It's more difficult to access for some people. It is more challenging to get resources simply because of the way that the system is set up and that schools are paid for with property tax. Like where I live right now in Miami, if I go 2 miles down the road, the exact house that I live in is only worth 2/3 of the value of this home. Built at the same time, it's just a different zip code and different people live there. And this is permeated throughout our society because we really have not corrected what used to be done by laws. So when you look at schools, kids will perform better when they are proud of their school. A lot of young people spend so much time at school that has the biggest impact in terms of the built environment on their life. But when you look at the various professions in terms of who designs schools, how they get built, unless they are in very affluent areas, public schools are designed by the same professionals who design jails. They use the same materials. They use the same designs. I've sat in on a very, very insightful panel discussion with the American Institute of Architects, and they show you the parallels. They show you how a jail is designed and how a school is designed. They're not that different unless you step back and you change zip codes and you have very strong PTA, like a lot of people who are from underserved communities, and then they get a chance to drive in a community where there are a lot of resources. They say, that school looks great. Look at the landscaping. And then they'll complain to the city. And they don't realize that's the PTA. You get a standard issue school, but the PTA has to make it beautiful. People don't understand the civics. They don't understand how the system is set up. And then they, in their heart of hearts, feel neglected in a realm that, although it may not seem fair, they didn't understand the basis of how the system worked. And it's a systems thing that we've got to get our arms around. And that's why integrating green technologies operates the way that we do, because we understand systems, we understand economics, we understand the civics, and we understand how to navigate the asteroid belt to get to those things where we can create value beyond what people might see.
Yeah. So it's really a kind of people centric way of thinking about buildings, and then yeah, I mean, very much in line with a lot of what's been happening, or a lot of evolution of healthy buildings in the past couple of years. So great stuff. Um, Recently, as you know, the White House and the EPA have launched the Clean Air in Buildings Challenge, which specifically prioritizes federal funding for indoor air quality, ventilation, and filtration assessments and improvements in public buildings, including those in underserved communities. And in many ways, those are the target of this initiative. What do you think of this initiative, candidly? At this point, we have fact sheets and some information that's been coming out over the past few weeks. You've reviewed that. You've had discussions with folks in and out of the government. What is your current assessment of what you like about it and what's good, what is lacking, and what is TBD? And then putting you on the spot a little bit, will this effort, which is very unique in that, I think to my knowledge, it's the first major government-led indoor air quality, HVAC focused type of program ever. And so there's a big need, there's a big opportunity that's been created by the pandemic, but there are lots of big government initiatives, and some of them are transformational, some of them are quote nothing burgers, and many of them are somewhere in between. So where do you think the Clean Air in Buildings Challenge will fall on that spectrum? Transformational, nothing burger, or somewhere in between?
I think the Clean Air in Buildings Challenge has all of the characteristics of being transformational. But the reality is, at the community level, it's up to us. And the reason it's up to us is because we've got to build coalitions, and we have to say what we want. We can't sit back and think, oh, we're going to get, clean air in school because of this thing. We've got to engage the government officials. The government officials spend an inordinate amount of time, probably 80% of their time, staying in position to have their strategies in place to continue to get reelected. So they need things to support. And people think that government officials and government agencies actually solve the problems. And to an extent they do. But when it gets to the heavy lifting and knowing what's possible, what are the technologies, who's going to do it, how's it going to work, what are the logistics, they don't really do that. They will hire consultants, engineering firms, and pretty much who I call the usual suspects. And when I say the usual suspects, it's because people give things to people they like, people trust people they like, and people support people they like. And if you're not around people long enough, and they don't get a chance to spend time with you long enough, they don't get a chance to like you, and they don't get a chance to trust you. So you wind up with nothing. That's just human nature. I often talk to you about, growing up, and I played really competitive high school basketball and town league basketball and soccer and things like that. When you play basketball and you're really, really good, and I was pretty good, and I had friends who, played professional basketball. The coach's son is going to be on the all-star team. You just know that that's how it works. And he's not that good. Now, every now and then, the coach's son is really good, and he deserves to be there. But it's disproportionate to the amount of all-star status that the coach's son gets compared to their ability. So it's not about ability. It's about advocating. It's about getting organized and advocating, and not just coming with the problem, identifying the problem, but at the same time coming with a set of solutions that have more than one way of doing it, so that those who can press things forward have a menu to choose from, but it has to be written and done and presented in a way they understand. They don't understand it, they are not taking the risk, they are not going to do it. And we've got to really get our arms around that, because we don't quite understand the way the world works.
Yeah. Well, and just to build on that, some of the commentary on this initiative, which has generally been favorable, and I myself am pretty favorable about it because it's overdue, and it's so needed. But some of the criticism has come on technical assistance and the capacity of some of these groups that and sets of buildings in communities that we're trying to help. It's great to make the money available. It's great to have goals and clearly defined goals, but then there's a big risk from the vision and the goals and then having the money to then what actually is done 5-10 years from now, and ultimately, is that better than status quo? And you're coming in, both you individually and IGT, into the technical assistance arena, trying to connect the dots from the big lofty goals to what is going to happen in a community or a set of communities, and understanding the ground reality of what's going on and what is possible. So I think that's great. And, we need a lot more of that, because, as you say, we have the way things would naturally run their course may not be getting us to those end goals. There's just going to be a machine that kind of goes underway right now, people competing for the money, and then the quality of the work and whether it's hitting the right communities and so forth is very much in question. So I'm excited about what you're doing. And I just maybe switching gears a little bit, as we talked about in your background and then your introduction, you've arrived in the quote healthy buildings world after kind of coming up and spending extensive time in the green buildings world, and often those two things are talked about separately, and but more and more you're hearing the linkage between sustainability and indoor air quality, and the two things being one and the same. So I guess question to you, is the healthy versus green buildings distinction a false one? And in other words, are healthy and green buildings really one and the same in your view?
Um, the green building movement has always been about causing the economic uptake, aka purchase of equipment. That's what it's been about, which is fine. But, and I know this firsthand because I've spent time as vice chair of the Miami chapter of the U.S. Green Building Council, and we were wildly successful. And I've spent time being the director of advocacy for all of South Florida. And there's always that positioning that you cannot change things from the outside. You have to be in it in order to change it. But people are going to take the path of least resistance. People don't quite get that change is difficult, and change causes conflict, and change causes battle, and change causes bloody noses sometimes. It's just like democracy. Democracy never was meant to, hold hands, sing kumbaya, and be fair to everyone. You have to fight for it. This is not something that's given to you. You have to fight for it every single day. So when we look at green buildings versus healthy buildings, all you have to do is pull out the page and start looking at what you get in terms of the score, the score sheet for using a green building certification pathway. And the things that are going to gain the most points are the things that are the most important. And healthy buildings and healthy aspects of buildings, and even the fact that you're making the building for the occupants of the building, not just the sake of building a building, is completely flawed. And we don't think in those terms as a people. And that's because of what is known in the world of behavioral economics, psychology. It's the prevention paradox. We don't do a good job at preventing bad things from happening. So we don't think in that way. And when I say the prevention paradox, all you have to do is, I come from the financial industry, so follow the money. And when you follow the money, you'll see that America spends 97% of our money in health and the health sciences on treatment and cures, which is fine, but it's 97%. Only 3% is spent on prevention. So where are people going to go? What are they going to pay homage to? What are they going to be loyal to? And what are the outcomes going to be? And that is why we had and continue to have such a difficult time in getting our arms around the COVID-19 pandemic. And that has to change. We cannot continue with that. We know the kinds of things that hurt people. We know that pollution is bad for you. We know that it leads to, COPD and asthma and chronic problems, et cetera. We know that the air inside buildings is, 4, 5, 10, pick a number, worse than outdoor air in most parts of America. But still, we have a very difficult time organizing our values and our behaviors and our consistency to solve problems, because we grew up with Hollywood movies where heroes and, the Avengers are going to come and fix it before the movie's over. And we're conditioned in that way. And we've got to get our heads on straight. Otherwise, this is going to be a very painful journey.
Mm. Just given that you've been in the sustainability and sustainable buildings world now for 20 plus years, can you talk a little bit about the evolution that you've seen from 2000 roughly, when you mentioned that you got started, to today, and then compare that to where, quote, healthy buildings is today in 2022, in terms of maturity and the path that you've seen from, what many describe is like, fairly immature green buildings early on. It wasn't measurable, verifiable, quantitative, and now it's become really mature, to the point where ESG reporting is a driver of capital markets and, people's access to financing. And it's quite sophisticated in some ways and has grown up a lot in the past 20 plus years. How do you see that experience relative to healthy buildings, where you now have a kind of analog from LEED to WELL, and to the USGBC and IWBI of, like, where are we at in that path right now? Are we kind of in a circa 2000 level period for healthy buildings? Are we further along? And do you think that the green buildings path is going to be similar to the one that healthy buildings will be on in terms of maturing over the next 10 to 20 years?
I think for the most part, people are starting to become more aware. I call it the Whole Foods effect. Because when you think about the company Whole Foods starting out, and it was an interesting and novel thing, people looked at you like you were weird if you were a vegetarian or if you wanted to eat tofu or any of those kinds of things. And now it's widely accepted, but it's still a luxury. And this is the Achilles heel of the green building movement, because we have too few of the buildings, because it's a luxury. And the people who need green building, healthy buildings the most don't get them. Those people that knocked on your door, not all of them, but many of them, who were the gig workers and the folks who brought you food in COVID and the folks who picked you up in an Uber and do all of those jobs, as soon as the utility of what we need them for right now ends, they're out of sight, out of mind, and we ignore. So we've got to stop that. And the way we've got to stop that is by accelerating the healthy building movement. And this is the reason that I'm very much pro clean air in buildings challenge. Because if you talk to government officials and you start talking about doing anything, the first thing they're going to tell you is, well, where's the funding going to come from? In conversations about the climate indoor clean air and buildings challenge, you have to tell them 4 times that this money is earmarked to do this because they just simply don't believe it. And that's because in the economics of how spending happens in governments, as you already know, Eric, 85% or more of the annual budget of a city, a town, a community is already earmarked and already encumbered and already committed to. So there's very little to work with in the operating budget to solve any problems. This is separate and apart from that. This is over and above that. And now that we finally have something on the board, we've got to make the best of it. And there's going to be chaos. There's going to be confusion. There are going to be people who think indoor air quality is buy an air purifier for 500 square feet and the average classroom is 1,042 square feet. And oh, by the way, the companies that sold you all those units early on during the pandemic are now out of business, so you can't even get the filters. Those things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we don't go, because we will be able, as Americans, to continue to improve and continue to refine and continue to cause successful outcomes, and then build a momentum to where people realize we've got to stop cutting folks off from resources in their communities because it's making them angry. It's making them desperate. It's making them violent. And we've got to ask ourselves the question, okay, this is the situation we find, but what happened and how did we get here? And I think that's where we are now. And if we go forward with healthy buildings, really transformational progress is going to happen.
Great. All right. So switching gears again, you're someone who is very into science, technology, and data, both in terms of your thinking, but also as a practitioner, applying this technology and using data in your field work. So what scientific, technological, and data innovations do you see as being most impactful on the types of challenges in buildings that you're working on today? And then where do you see the frontier over the next, 5 to 10 years?
Well, we're going to have to continue to roll out advanced technology. We're going to have to come to a reckoning that says we've got to verify, we've got to monitor, we've got to have data that's backed by evidence. We've got to, when I met you and I looked at SafeTraces and what it does and where it came from, and its original purpose and intention, and then the exploratory exercises around its versatility and the kinds of things you could use it for, I was all in. And one of the main reasons I'm all in on technology and being able to do real world experiments is because in order to make progress, we've got to fail quickly and often and remember and keep those things in almost a recycle bin that didn't work, because sometimes you'll find that you were just doing it a bit too early. The other thing is that anything that is not data backed by evidence and verifiable science is pretty much building mythology and politics and just things that people tell themselves that have nothing to do with reality. And personally, I can't win in that game, and people that look like me largely cannot win at that game because your dad's not the coach, so you're not going to be on the all-star team.
Okay, well, and picking up on that, so and last question, there's a notable lack of diversity in many major service industries touching buildings at pretty much all levels. You have a unique and valuable perspective as an executive within a successful minority business enterprise. What has been your own experience operating in the kind of built environment in that professional realm? And perhaps you can share your counterintuitive approach on driving successful outcomes.
Well, what I can tell you is as soon as you put a label on something, the average person will equate that to the reason why you're there. So when we meet new people, new opportunities, they don't know that we're a minority business enterprise. And we look at what's needed, we look at what's possible, we look at what's available to us. We look at tried, tested, and true new technologies, which are typically 15 to 20 years old, but folks just are resistant to it. And we position ourselves to be the ones to come in terms of innovation. If you are the odd person out and you want to get a contract, it does not help you at any level to be a minority business enterprise and that thing you have is just like what everyone else has. It just doesn't work. People will believe you're there because you're a minority. There are already people that will look at you and immediately assume you're a minority business enterprise. So you don't even need to say it. So by default, people believe that. And they think that that's why you're there. So it is incumbent upon all of the underserved minority groups to hear me and hear me very clearly. You cannot do what everyone else is doing and win. You have to solve the difficult problems. You have to sometimes bring the problem to the attention of decision makers and cause them to run out of reasons why they should not attack solving it. So we always come through the front door or the side door or the back door with an innovative mindset so that there can be scale in mind in everything we do. It takes longer. It's more complicated. It might not work. But I can tell you that when it does work, you are at a disproportionate advantage because you're not doing what someone else can easily do. And you don't have to get into this friction of taking something from someone, the coach's son who gets it all the time, and giving it to someone else. This is the place at which America has to reckon with. And we've got to push forward in advanced technologies in the built environment. And when you look at all industries, the last two of all industries, including the government, that have the least uptake of innovation, the least digitized, the least progress forward, fighting for last place, is architecture, engineering, construction in the built environment, and agriculture. And we got to have somewhere to stay, and we got to have food to eat. So we've got to get ourselves together because we've got it all backwards and wrong.
Yes. Well, those two industries are where I've spent much of my career. So I hear you loud and clear. So that was it for questions. Before we go here, and thanks so much for joining, I want to give you the floor with any parting thoughts that you want to share for our audience.
Well, just because I win doesn't mean someone else has to lose. And we're wired that way. We're conditioned that way. So we have to go into a realm of what's known as co-opetition. We have to learn how to collaborate together and compete at the same time. And we're not very good at that. We also have to come to a reckoning of if all things are equal and you lose, it doesn't mean that your life has come to an end. I have seen people compete against me who don't look like me. And when they lose, they're ready to jump off the nearest bridge because they've been conditioned that that's never supposed to happen and that they're better and all these sort of mythical things. When in fact, we're getting back all the way back around to performance because we've got to rebuild the infrastructure of our entire country. We've got, 45,000 bridges and tunnels and buildings that are just falling apart at the same. We don't even have enough people to do all the work. So we've got to figure out how we're going to compete, how we're going to get our mental health together in order to work together as Americans to be able to do it. And we've got to go into it understanding it's not going to be fair. We've got to go into it knowing you better bring it, because you just might lose, and you can't have the system rigged in your favor and think you're even going to produce excellent results, because those two things just don't go together.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great parting thoughts, kind of profound ones, but thanks so much. And this discussion was fantastic. Really appreciate you sharing your time, your experience, and all the great work you're doing. And we wish you the best and look forward to seeing what comes next from you and the IGT team.
Well, I just want to leave you with just one parting thought, because I do this all the time. I always go back into history and find people that look like me that actually made significant, meaningful contributions. So I've done that for indoor air quality and the indoor environment. So you start looking at, a gentleman named David Crosway, who graduated from Purdue University in 1913 with an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in mechanical engineering. He is pretty much a guy who had 39 US patents and 80 international patents for HVAC. And one of his biggest accomplishments is actually doing the HVAC design and system for Radio City Music Hall and Rockefeller Center.
Wow.
Who knew? Who knew? So these people really had it tough, really had it tough. So we've got to also have everyone understand that that's American history, that happened, but we have a tendency to celebrate people who don't matter that much. They're just famous.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good fact. I had no idea about that. So thanks for sharing. But thank you so much again. And all the best.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.